Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the latest developments throughout the front line, where there has been some territorial changes across the front for the first time in this month. Starting out in the north by the Kharkiv front next to the Luhansk border, we see that the Russian forces made some minor advances here to the south of the village of Pershiterevneve, here in the direction of the Kupiansk road that goes from Kupiansk to Svatove. So this is the main Ukrainian supply line towards the front by Svatove. So the Russians have an interest in going down and cutting it off. However, they have to pass through a long open field, which could indicate that the Ukrainians most likely have some minefields here and fortifications. So that would be in a similar fashion to that of the Ukrainian offensive, which would make it difficult for the Russians to advance in this area without taking a lot of losses. Therefore, we are seeing them advance slowly by bit by bit. As we can see, they have not advanced here in a very, very long time. So this is the first advance in a long time. And we're seeing them slowly attempting some sort of advance here. Then we move on to the Diprova area, where here the Ukrainians have managed to push the Russians a bit back here, where they've managed to push them towards the village itself and are reaching the border of the village. And the Russian forces have managed to slightly advance here to the south, where they have gotten control over most of the road. They are lacking the final bits of it towards the power station. Until then, they have managed to actually cut off the main road through the forest line. So most likely they'll try to move southwards and try to cut off some Ukrainian forces in between the forest lines and try to gain control over the forest lines here to the southwest of Kreminna. And at the same time, we're seeing the Ukrainians attack Diprova, which is an interesting tactic, because if the Ukrainians manage to take control over Diprova, then they can threaten the Russian advances here in the Serebryansky forest area and possibly go around them. Next up, we have the Pilorifica area, where here there is continuous fighting, as there has been for a very, very long time, and the Russians have here managed to advance towards the village and captured some of the forest lines here to the northeast of the village. Fighting also continues here by the area outside of the village, as well as by the mining station here to the south of the village. So generally there's a lot of fighting here within the village at all parts of it, and the Russian forces have managed to advance a tiny bit. Then we move on to the Avdiivka area, where here there's been Russian advances both to the north and to the south. By Upitne, they've managed to gain control over this field here, and they are moving closer to the Ukrainian military base here to the south of Avdiivka. They are looking to attack in the direction of it, capturing it. As we can see, they have control to the east of it and to the west of it, and they're most likely going to be looking for a pincer maneuver, attacking from both sides to take control of it, from attacking from every direction possible. As for to the north by the Kamianka area, the Russian forces have managed to advance slightly beyond Kamianka, moving southwards and westwards from the village, trying to gain control over the roads leading down to the southern parts of Kamianka and then towards Avdiivka and the Dacha area here to the south of it. So here to the east of Avdiivka, to the northeast of the city, there is a lot of Dacha areas. So these areas are all areas which has what is akin to summer houses, where you can just get a house that you use for the summer vacation, and these are filled with plantation and just isolated buildings. So these are sparsely populated summer house areas, and they are not heavily defended, but there could be a lot of booby traps. They are next to open fields, and there's fortifications in these areas, which makes them areas where both sides are used for heavy defenses, especially the Ukrainians. When we saw the Russian advance through the northwest of Kamianka towards Avdiivka, it was towards this area here where the Ukrainians managed to stop them, and then they retreated from the area because they were unable to break through. So as you can see, they are effective defenses, and they have some here to the south of Kamianka as well. Then we move on to the area here south of Pervomayske, where the Ukrainian forces have managed to expand their buffer zone east of Novoselivske, and they have managed to push the Russians back. The Russians prior to this had some fortifications and control over some fortifications here to the east of Novoselivske and were pressuring the village, but now they have been pushed back to this borderline here. Then we move on to the Uledar area, where here the Ukrainian forces have managed to fully push the Russians back from the control over the southeastern Dacia area, as well as the fields here to the south of the coal mining plant area. So the Russians have been pushed all the way back to the Dacia area here to the south, as well as to the areas of the village of Mikilske, both the northern parts. So essentially the Ukrainians have now fully control over the area they had prior to the initial Russian Vuhledar offensive back in February. This means that the Ukrainian forces have returned to their prior positions and have full control and solid control over Vuhledar. Meanwhile, the Russians were back to where they started and are essentially in a position where there's just a lot of artillery battles between the two areas, and anyone could start an offensive in this part, as the fields here in the middle are just a gray zone that no one is traversing or holding positions in. Then we move all the way back to the northern parts by Novoselivske, because here the Russian forces have managed to gain control over the initial parts of the village and gained a proper foothold within it across the road and railway line. So here they have managed to actually, after heavy shelling, advance a bit in. And this is also in a geolocated video by Deep State Map that showcases some burning vehicles and the aftermath of artillery strikes within the village itself. So this generally means that the Russian forces are not giving up on their Luhansk offensive. They are trying to gain full control over the river line before they actually take advantage of their foothold. So it looks like they are looking to actually reach the river line. Currently what is happening is that the Russian forces have control over most areas to the east of the Serebets River. However, there are areas which is the villages of Novoselivske and Pilorifica, which are located on Pilorifica both on the west and eastern bank of the river, and Novoselivske on the eastern bank of the river. So the Russians don't have full control over the eastern bank, and this is something that I've been covering for a long time. They've been unable to reach the river line and have full control over the eastern bank, which is why this assault across the river line surprised me, because they don't have a proper flank to actually take advantage of this. And then we see here by Novoselivske, they previously launched an attack in the last month where they captured the heights here to the south of Novoselivske. So this assault of Novoselivske has been long in coming. The village of Novoselivske has changed hands a lot of times throughout this past months, past half year across the Luhansk front. So generally we're seeing a lot of fighting here, as it is the last bastion or outpost to the east of the Serebets River. With this, the Russians would essentially have full control over the northern parts, and then they would have to storm Pilorifica and the Novoselivske areas to gain full control over the eastern bank of the Serebets River, after which they will have a strong enough flank to then launch an offensive through and across the river line, or even push northwards across. So generally, this is a very important village for the Russians to take control of, and the fact that they haven't done it so far is actually troublesome for them. And that is going to be all for this update, as the general situation on the whole southern Zaporizhia front has not changed over the 24 hours that have passed. The Ukrainian forces continue their offensives. They are launching and gathering more and more forces, launching more offensives, but they have so far been unable to change the lines here on the front since the start of the month. So for the past 4 days they have not changed the front line, which indicates that they are so far unable to push through the Russian lines of defense. They've reached the first formal line of defense, but since then they have not been able to launch another attack in that direction, and they are still unable to gain control over Robotine. They don't have full control over Zermayorske. They have a foothold in the northern parts, but the southern part is contested as the Russians are constantly shelling it. So generally across the front line there is no major successes on the Ukrainian offensive, and that is all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.